The emergency dispatch crackled through the radio at 3:47 a.m., piercing the silence of Station 19 like a knife through glass. Code red. Multi-vehicle collision, Highway 85 overpass. Structural collapse imminent. Multiple casualties trapped. All units respond immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Derek Thompson's weathered hands gripped the radio as he processed the magnitude of what they were facing. 23 years of emergency response had taught him to read between the lines of dispatch calls, and this one carried the weight of catastrophe. The Highway 85 overpass had been flagged for structural concerns just 6 months ago, but bureaucratic red tape had delayed the repairs. Now, with a massive pileup beneath it and a fully loaded semi-truck dangling precariously from the damaged support beam, they were staring at a nightmare scenario. Thompson here. How many vehicles are involved? His voice remained steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. At least 12 confirmed, possibly more. Semi-truck jackknifed, fuel spill spreading. We've got families trapped in passenger vehicles directly under the compromised section. Estimate 15 to 20 casualties, unknown status. The station erupted into controlled chaos. Firefighters scrambled into their gear, paramedics grabbed their equipment, and the massive red engines roared to life. But in the midst of this orchestrated emergency response, all eyes turned to the newest member of their team. Elena Rodriguez stood by her locker, methodically checking her equipment with an almost unnatural calm. At 28, she was compact and unassuming, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, her brown eyes focused on the task at hand. She'd been with Station 19 for exactly 3 months, transferred from a smaller district upstate, and in that time, she'd become something of an enigma. "Rodriguez here with Engine 3, Thompson barked, but his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "Stay close to Martinez and follow his lead." Elena nodded without looking up, her fingers continuing their precise inventory of her gear. Oxygen tank, check. Thermal imaging camera, check. Halogen bar, check. Her movements were fluid, practiced, almost ritualistic in their precision. Lieutenant Frank Martinez, a 15-year veteran with graying temples and laugh lines earned from countless station house stories, approached her with barely concealed concern. "Listen, rookie, this one's going to be ugly. We're talking about structural collapse, potential explosions, and people trapped in spaces that would make a coffin feel spacious. If you're having second thoughts." "I'm ready," Elena replied quietly, her voice carrying none of the bravado typically associated with new recruits eager to prove themselves. There was something else there, something that made Martinez pause. The thing about Elena Rodriguez was that she didn't fit the typical mold of a firefighter. She wasn't the loudest voice in the station, didn't regale her colleagues with stories of her training academy exploits, and certainly didn't engage in the good-natured competition that usually bonded new team members. Instead, she maintained a professional distance that some interpreted as shyness, others as arrogance. During her 3 months at Station 19, Elena had been competent but unremarkable. She passed all her drills, followed orders without question, and showed up for every shift with the same quiet demeanor. But she'd never been tested in a real emergency of this magnitude, and doubt hung in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. The doubt wasn't entirely unfounded. Elena's application had raised some eyebrows when she'd first arrived. Her previous station had been in a rural district where the most exciting calls involved barn fires and the occasional car accident on country roads. Station 19, by contrast, served a metropolitan area with industrial complexes, high-rise buildings, and major highways. The learning curve was steep, and not everyone made the transition successfully. Captain Thompson had seen promising recruits crack under pressure before. Some froze during their first real emergency, Others made critical errors that put lives at risk. Elena's quiet demeanor, while professional, didn't necessarily inspire confidence when lives hung in the balance. Rodriguez seemed solid enough. Martinez had told Thompson after her first month, but there's something about her that I can't quite put my finger on. She's almost too calm, you know? Like she's seen this all before. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Thompson had replied, though privately he wondered if Elena's calmness was confidence, or simply the calm before the storm. The engines screamed through the empty streets, their sirens wailing a warning to the sleeping city. Elena sat in the jump seat, her helmet secure, her breathing steady and controlled. Around her, the veteran firefighters went through their own mental preparations, checking equipment, reviewing procedures, mentally preparing for what they might encounter. 2 minutes. The driver called back. As they approached the scene, the full scope of the disaster became apparent. The highway overpass loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a wounded giant, its concrete support beams cracked and twisted. Below, a maze of twisted metal and shattered glass stretched across 4 lanes of highway. The semi-truck hung from the damaged overpass like a pendulum, its cargo of steel beams scattered across the roadway. Emergency vehicles had already established a perimeter, their flashing lights creating a strobe effect that made the scene feel surreal. Police officers directed traffic away from the area while paramedics set up a triage station. The incident. Commander, Deputy Chief Sarah Washington, stood at the center of it all, coordinating the response with the cool efficiency of someone who'd seen it all before. Multiple entrapments, Washington briefed the incoming crews. We've got a family of 4 in a sedan directly under the compromised section. 2 vehicles with elderly passengers approximately 50 feet from the spill zone. The semi-driver is conscious but trapped in his cab, which is hanging 20 feet above the roadway. She gestured toward the overpass structure, where hairline cracks spider-webbed across the concrete. Engineering assessment shows we've got maybe 30 minutes before that support beam gives way completely. When it does, everything underneath gets crushed. The weight of the situation settled over the assembled first responders like a heavy blanket. 30 minutes to extract multiple casualties from a disaster zone that could collapse at any moment. It was the kind of scenario that separated the heroes from the zeros, the veterans from the rookies. Elena absorbed the briefing with the same quiet attention she brought to everything else, while other firefighters asked questions about equipment, positioning, and backup plans. She simply nodded and began walking toward the wreckage. "Where's she going?" Martinez asked, but Elena was already moving with purpose toward the most dangerous section of the collapse zone. The family trapped in the sedan was barely visible beneath the twisted metal and debris. The car had been compressed to half its original height, its occupants trapped in a space that seemed impossibly small. Other firefighters had already begun setting up hydraulic equipment to attempt an extraction, but the process would be slow and methodical. Elena knelt beside the wreckage, her trained eye assessing the situation with clinical precision. She could hear voices from inside the crushed vehicle, a man calling for help, a woman crying, children whimpering in terror. The sound cut through her professional detachment like a blade. "Can you hear me?" she called through a gap in the twisted metal. "My name is Elena. I'm with the fire department. We're going to get you out of there." "Please," came the muffled response. "My daughter... She's not responding. I think she's hurt bad." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She reached for her radio, but something made her pause. Instead, she began examining the wreckage more closely, her fingers tracing the pattern of damage with an expertise that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 3 months of service. "The hydraulic spreaders won't work here," she said to Martinez as he approached. "The weight distribution is all wrong. We try to lift from this angle, and we'll destabilize the entire section." Martinez frowned. "That's not what the manual says. We follow procedure, start with the hydraulics, then The manual didn't account for this configuration, Elena interrupted, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made Martinez pause. Look at the stress patterns in the metal. See how the roof pillar buckled? If we apply pressure from the conventional angle, we'll compress the passenger compartment even further. She was right, Martinez realized with surprise. The damage pattern was unusual, created by the unique angle of impact and the weight of debris from above. Standard extraction procedures would need to be modified, and Elena had spotted it immediately. So what do you suggest? Martinez asked, and for the first time, there was genuine respect in his voice. Elena was already moving, her hands working with practiced efficiency as she repositioned the hydraulic equipment. We need to create a fulcrum point here, distribute the weight laterally instead of vertically. It's going to take longer, but it's the only way to avoid making things worse. As she worked, other firefighters began to take notice. There was something about the way Elena moved, the confidence in her actions, that suggested experience far beyond her official record. Her hands never hesitated, never searched for the right tool or the proper angle. She worked with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this before. Many times. Captain Thompson watched from the command post, his radio crackling with updates from various teams. The semi-truck driver had been successfully extracted. The elderly passengers were being evacuated from the secondary vehicles, but the family in the sedan remained trapped. Time was running out. How long? He asked Martinez over the radio. Rodriguez thinks she can have them out in 15 minutes, Martinez replied. But Chief, there's something you should know. She's not working by the book. She's improvising. And it's actually working. Thompson's eyebrows rose. In his experience, rookies who improvised in high-stress situations usually created more problems than they solved. But the alternative was following standard procedure and potentially losing 4 lives when the overpass collapsed. Let her work, he decided, but keep everyone else clear. If this goes wrong, I don't want to lose more people. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena continued her methodical work, oblivious to the conversation taking place around her. She'd managed to create a small opening in the wreckage, just large enough to pass water and medical supplies to the trapped family. The little girl was conscious now, crying for her mother, but alive. The man had a broken arm, but was coherent. The woman had a head injury, but was responsive. Almost there, Elena called to them. Just hold on a little longer. But even as she spoke, a low rumble echoed through the air. The overpass shuddered, and a chunk of concrete the size of a refrigerator crashed to the ground just 20 feet away. The structural integrity was failing faster than the engineers had predicted. Everyone out. Thompson's voice boomed across the scene. All personnel evacuate the collapse zone immediately. Firefighters began retreating to safer positions, but Elena remained at the wreckage, her hands working frantically to complete the extraction. She was so close, just a few more minutes and she'd have them free. Rodriguez, that's an order. Get out of there now. Elena looked up, her eyes meeting Thompson's across the disaster zone. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then she turned back to the wreckage, her voice steady as she spoke into her radio. Negative, Chief. I've got this. It was the first time anyone at Station 19 had heard Elena Rodriguez refuse a direct order. It was also the moment when everyone realized there was much more to their quiet new colleague than met the eye. The overpass groaned ominously, and another piece of debris crashed down. Elena didn't flinch. She continued working, her movements becoming more urgent, but never losing their precision. Whatever was about to happen, she was committed to seeing it through. In the distance, more emergency vehicles were arriving. News helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights illuminating the scene like a stage. The city was waking up to the reality of the disaster, But for Elena Rodriguez, the world had narrowed to this moment, this family, this choice between safety and duty. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about the quiet woman who joined their team just 3 months ago. The real Elena Rodriguez was about to step out of the shadows, and Station 19 would never be the same. The atmosphere at Station 19 had been skeptical from the moment Elena Rodriguez walked through the doors 3 months earlier. She'd arrived on a Tuesday morning carrying a single duffel bag and a transfer file that raised more questions than it answered. Her previous assignment at Station 47 in rural Millbrook County had been a quiet posting, mostly medical calls. The occasional house fire and routine inspections of local businesses. Lieutenant Frank Martinez had been the first to voice what everyone was thinking during the weekly briefing. Look, I'm not saying transfers can't work out, but going from barn fires to high-rise rescues? That's like jumping from Little League to the World Series. The comment had drawn chuckles from the assembled firefighters, but Captain Thompson had maintained his professional demeanor. Rodriguez comes with solid recommendations from her previous captain. We'll give her the same chance we give everyone else. That chance had been met with polite but unmistakable doubt. Elena's fellow firefighters weren't malicious in their skepticism. They were protective of their brotherhood and the lives they were sworn to save. In their world, trust was earned through shared experiences under fire, and Elena simply hadn't had the opportunities to prove herself in their environment. Firefighter Jake Collins, a 7-year veteran with a reputation for speaking his mind, had been particularly vocal about his concerns. Nothing personal against Rodriguez, but this job isn't about following procedures in a textbook. When you're crawling through smoke so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face, or when you're making split-second decisions about structural integrity, you need people who've been there before. Collins wasn't wrong, and everyone knew. Emergency response required a unique blend of training, instinct, and experience that couldn't be taught in a classroom. The stakes were too high for on-the-job learning, and Elena's quiet demeanor during her first weeks had done little to inspire confidence. During training exercises, Elena had been competent but unremarkable. She completed the obstacle courses within acceptable time frames, demonstrated proper use of equipment, and showed adequate knowledge of emergency procedures. But she never stood out, never displayed the kind of exceptional skill that would mark her as someone special. She's solid, Martinez had told his wife over dinner one evening, but solid isn't enough when people's lives are on the line. We need to be exceptional. The doubt had been reinforced by Elena's social behavior within the firehouse. Most new recruits made an effort to integrate with their colleagues, sharing stories from their previous assignments, participating in the good-natured ribbing that was part of firehouse culture, and gradually earning their place in the tight-knit family that emergency responders became. Elena, by contrast, kept to herself. She arrived for shifts on time, performed her duties without complaint, and left when her shift ended. She didn't join the crew for their regular Thursday night gatherings at Murphy's Tavern, didn't participate in the station softball team, and rarely contributed to the casual conversations that filled the quiet hours between calls. Firefighter Amy Chun, one of the few women at Station 19, had made several attempts to draw Elena into the social fabric of the team. Want to grab coffee before shift change? She'd offered on multiple occasions, only to be politely declined with Elena's standard response, "Thanks, but I have some things to take care of." The rejection wasn't hostile, but it was consistent, and it created a barrier that her colleagues interpreted as either shyness or superiority. Neither interpretation helped Elena's cause with a group that valued camaraderie as much as competence. The situation had been further complicated by Elena's habit of studying during downtime. While other firefighters watched television, played cards, or engaged in casual conversation, Elena could often be found reading technical manuals, reviewing building blueprints, or studying emergency response protocols. Her dedication to preparation was admirable, But it also reinforced the perception that she was trying to compensate for lack of real-world experience. "She's cramming like a student before finals," Collins had observed Martinez during one of their private conversations. "That's not how this job works. You can't memorize your way through a real emergency." The criticism had been particularly sharp after Elena's first-month evaluation. Captain Thompson had noted her exemplary adherence to safety protocols and thorough knowledge of departmental procedures, but there had been a subtle undertone of concern about her limited experience in high-stress situations and need for continued mentorship. Elena had accepted the evaluation without comment, her expression remaining neutral as Thompson outlined areas for improvement. Her lack of reaction had been interpreted by some as indifference, by others as quiet determination, but it had done nothing to address the underlying concerns about her readiness for the challenges ahead. The doubts had been especially pronounced among the veteran firefighters who'd seen promising recruits fail when faced with real emergencies. Lieutenant David Park, a 12-year veteran, had shared his perspective during a private conversation with Martinez. "She's got book smarts, I'll give her that. But when you're standing in front of a wall of flame, wondering if the floor beneath you is about to collapse, you need more than textbook knowledge. You need instinct, and instinct comes from experience." Park's concerns weren't unfounded. He'd witnessed several promising recruits struggle when faced with the reality of emergency response. Some froze during their first structural fire. Others made critical errors in judgment that put lives at risk. The margin for error in their profession was razor thin, and Park wasn't convinced that Elena possessed the intangible qualities that separated competent firefighters from exceptional ones. The skepticism had been particularly evident during Elena's first few emergency calls. She'd responded to a minor apartment fire in her second week, following Martinez's lead as they conducted a room-by-room search. Her performance had been adequate. She'd followed proper procedures, maintained radio contact, and completed her assigned tasks, but she'd shown none of the natural aggression that veteran firefighters looked for in promising recruits. "She's too careful," Martinez confided to his partner after the call. "I know that sounds crazy, but sometimes in this job, you need to take calculated risks. She's playing it safe, and that's not always the right approach." The observation had been shared by other members of the crew who'd worked with Elena during her first month. She demonstrated technical competence, but lacked the kind of situational awareness and split-second decision-making that characterized the best firefighters. Her approach was methodical, by the book, and inherently conservative. During a medical call in her 6th week, Elena had assisted paramedics in treating a construction worker who'd fallen from scaffolding. Her first aid skills were excellent, her bedside manner was professional, and she'd correctly identified the symptoms of internal bleeding. But when the situation became chaotic, family members screaming, bystanders offering conflicting information, and the patient going into shock, Elena had seemed to retreat into herself, following established protocols, rather than adapting to the evolving situation. "She's competent," paramedic Lisa Rodriguez had told Martinez after the call, "but she doesn't have that extra gear that great first responders have. When things get crazy, she gets more rigid, not more flexible." The assessment had been particularly troubling because flexibility and adaptability were essential qualities in emergency response. No two situations were identical, and the ability to improvise while maintaining safety standards was what separated good firefighters from great ones. Elena's reputation had been further shaped by her response to hazing, or rather, her lack of response. Firehouse culture included a tradition of good-natured ribbing, designed to test new recruits' resilience and build camaraderie. Elena had been subjected to the usual pranks: short-sheeted beds, relocated equipment, and playful challenges. To her competence, her response had been to ignore the hazing entirely. She'd remade her bed without comment, found her relocated equipment without complaint, and deflected challenges with polite but firm professionalism. While her maturity was admirable, her refusal to engage with the social dynamics of the firehouse had been interpreted as aloofness. "She's not unfriendly," Chun had told her husband during one of their evening conversations, "but she's not friendly either. It's like she's here to do a job, not to be part of a team." The distinction was important in a profession where teamwork could mean the difference between life and death. Firefighters needed to trust their colleagues implicitly, and trust was built through shared experiences and mutual respect. Elena's professional distance, while not hostile, had created a barrier that prevented the kind of bonding that was essential for effective teamwork. The situation had reached a tipping point. During Elena's 8th week, when she'd been assigned to work with Collins on a routine inspection of a downtown office building. The inspection had been uneventful, but Collins had used the opportunity to test Elena's knowledge and preparedness. "So what's your assessment of the evacuation routes?" Collins had asked as they completed their inspection of the building's fire. Safety Systems. Elena had provided a thorough analysis of the building's strengths and weaknesses, identifying potential bottlenecks and suggesting improvements to the evacuation plan. Her assessment had been technically sound and professionally presented, but it had also been delivered with the same emotional detachment that characterized all her interactions. "You know," Collins had said as they drove back to the station, "this job isn't just about checking boxes and following procedures. Sometimes you need to trust your gut, make decisions with incomplete information, and adapt when things don't go according to plan." Elena had nodded politely, but her response had been typically measured. "I understand the importance of situational awareness and adaptability. I'm working to develop those skills." The exchange had perfectly encapsulated the crew's frustration with Elena. She said all the right things, demonstrated technical competence, and maintained professional standards, but she seemed to be missing some essential quality that would mark her as a true firefighter rather than just someone who happened to work at a fire station. As Elena's third month at Station 19 drew to a close, the consensus among her colleagues had been that she was a decent person and a competent firefighter, but not someone they would want beside them in a truly dangerous situation. She was the kind of recruit who would probably have a solid career in emergency response, but who would never be considered exceptional. That consensus had been about to be dramatically challenged by the events unfolding on Highway 85, where Elena Rodriguez was about to prove that appearances could be deceiving and that quiet confidence was sometimes more valuable than loud bravado. The woman her colleagues thought they knew was about to reveal herself as someone entirely different. The metallic groaning of the overpass grew louder as Elena worked, her hands moving with surgical precision through the twisted wreckage. Each piece of debris she removed revealed more of the sedan's interior, where the trapped family huddled in a space that seemed to shrink with every passing moment. The father's voice had grown weaker, the mother's responses more sporadic, and the children's cries had faded to frightened whimpers. "Rodriguez, I'm giving you 60 seconds to clear that area." Captain Thompson's voice crackled through her radio, the urgency unmistakable. "The structural engineers are saying the support beam could fail at any moment." Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't pause in her work. She'd managed to create a small access point, just wide enough to pass medical supplies and water to the family, but nowhere near large enough for extraction. The hydraulic spreaders lay abandoned beside her. Their conventional application would have been not just useless but potentially fatal in this configuration. Around the perimeter of the collapse zone, her colleagues watched with a mixture of admiration and horror. Lieutenant Martinez paced behind the safety barrier, his radio in hand, torn between his duty to follow orders and his growing recognition that Elena might be their only hope of saving the trapped family. "She's not going to make it," Collins muttered to Chun, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine concern. "That concrete is going to come down, and she's going to be right underneath it." Chun's knuckles were white as she gripped her equipment bag. "Someone should go in there and drag her out, this is suicide." But even as she spoke, Chun found herself transfixed by Elena's methodical approach to the seemingly impossible task. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she worked. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no panic despite the deteriorating situation around her. Elena had identified a critical stress point in the wreckage where the sedan's frame had buckled, in a way that created a potential pivot point. By carefully repositioning the hydraulic equipment and using a combination of spreading and lifting techniques, she was attempting to create a controlled collapse of the debris field that would open an escape route without further compressing. The passenger compartment. The technique was not in any manual. It required an understanding of structural mechanics, weight distribution, and material stress that went far beyond standard firefighter training. Yet Elena applied these principles with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, many times. Where the hell did she learn to do that? Martinez whispered into his radio, more to himself than to anyone else. The question hung in the air as Elena continued her work, oblivious to the growing crowd of emergency responders who had gathered to watch. Word of the unprecedented rescue attempt had spread through the emergency services community, and off-duty firefighters, paramedics, and police officers had begun arriving at the scene. Deputy Chief Washington stood at the incident command post, her experienced eye taking in the full scope of the situation. She'd seen hundreds of rescue operations during her career, but Elena's approach was unlike anything in her experience. The young firefighter was essentially rewriting the rules of technical rescue in real time, improvising solutions to problems that the textbook said were unsolvable. "Chief, we need to make a decision," Thompson's voice carried over the radio. "Do we let Rodriguez continue, or do we pull her out and accept that the family is lost?" It was the kind of decision that defined careers and haunted commanders for the rest of their lives. Washington's training told her to prioritize the safety of her personnel, to avoid compounding the tragedy by losing a firefighter in addition to the trapped civilians. But her instincts, honed by decades of emergency response, told her that Elena Rodriguez was operating on a level that transcended normal protocols. "Give her another 5 minutes," Washington decided. "But I want everyone else moved back to the secondary perimeter. If this goes wrong, I don't want to lose anyone else." The decision sent a ripple of tension through the assembled responders. 5 minutes felt like an eternity when dealing with an unstable structure, but it also represented Elena's last chance to complete what she'd started. Elena seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Her movements became more fluid, more urgent, as she worked to complete the delicate repositioning of the hydraulic equipment. She was racing against time, physics, and the growing instability of the overpass structure above her. The trapped father's voice drifted through the access point Elena had created. "Please ... my daughter. She's not moving anymore." The words cut through Elena's professional composure like a blade. For just a moment, her hands paused, and something flickered across her face, a shadow of emotion that her colleagues had never seen before. Then she was back to work, her movements now carrying a desperate intensity that spoke of personal stakes beyond professional duty. "I see her," Elena called through the opening. "She's breathing, just unconscious. I'm going to get you all out of there." The confidence in her voice was absolute, unwavering, and somehow more reassuring than any standard emergency response protocol. The family seemed to sense it too, their panic subsiding slightly as Elena's calm authority washed over them. But the clock was ticking, and the overpass was showing signs of imminent collapse. A section of concrete guardrail broke free and crashed to the ground just 30 feet from Elena's position, sending a shower of debris across the roadway. The impact vibrated through the structure, and several of the hairline cracks in the support beams visibly widened. "Rodriguez, that's it." Thompson's voice was sharp with command authority. "Get out of there now." Elena looked up from her work, her eyes meeting Thompson's across the disaster zone. In that moment, Something passed between them, a communication that transcended words or radio protocols. Thompson saw something in Elena's expression that made him pause, a certainty that was both reassuring and terrifying. 2 more minutes, Elena said into her radio, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. I've almost got it. The response sent a shock through the assembled responders. Elena Rodriguez, the quiet transfer from Rural Station 47, had just negotiated with a captain's direct order during an active emergency. It was unthinkable, unprecedented, and somehow completely appropriate for the situation. Martinez found himself stepping forward, his own radio in hand. Chief, I'm going in there with her. She shouldn't be alone. The offer was both brave and terrifying. Martinez had a wife and 2 children at home, a mortgage, and a retirement plan that assumed he would survive his career in emergency response. But watching Elena work alone in the collapse zone triggered every protective instinct he'd developed during his 15 years of service. Negative, Elena's voice cut through the radio chatter. I work better alone. Stay clear. The dismissal was gentle but firm, and it carried an authority that none of her colleagues had heard before. This wasn't the tentative new recruit who'd been struggling to fit in at Station 19. This was someone else entirely, someone who operated with the kind of confidence that came from facing impossible situations and finding ways to win. Elena's technique was beginning to work. The hydraulic spreaders, repositioned according to her unconventional strategy, were creating the controlled collapse she'd envisioned. Pieces of debris shifted and settled, opening new pathways through the wreckage while maintaining the structural integrity of the passenger compartment. But the process was agonizingly slow, and the overpass structure was deteriorating rapidly. Another section of concrete broke free, this time from directly overhead, missing Elena by less than 10 feet. The impact sent a tremor through the ground that could be felt by every person at the scene. She's going to die in there, Collins sighed, his voice tight with emotion. And we're just standing here watching it happen. The observation captured the helplessness that everyone felt. They were trained to act, to solve problems, to save lives. Standing on the sidelines while one of their own risked everything went against every instinct they developed as emergency responders. Elena seemed oblivious to the growing concern around her. She was completely focused on the task at hand, her world narrowed to the few square feet of wreckage where 4 lives hung in the balance. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, each adjustment calculated to maximize the chances of success while minimizing the risk of further collapse. The breakthrough came suddenly. With a grinding sound of shifting metal, the debris field restructured itself according to Elena's plan. The passenger compartment of the sedan was suddenly accessible, the trapped family visible through an opening that Elena had literally carved out of the wreckage. I've got access, Elena announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph that her colleagues had never heard before. Preparing for extraction. The words sent a surge of hope through the assembled responders, but the celebration was premature. The overpass structure chose that moment to issue its most ominous warning, yet a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The support beam was failing, and when it went, everything underneath would be crushed. Elena had seconds, not minutes, to complete the extraction. As she prepared to enter the confined space where the family waited, her colleagues held their breath and wondered if they were about to witness a miracle or a tragedy. What happened next would force everyone at Station 19 to completely reassess everything they thought they knew about Elena Rodriguez and about the nature of heroism itself. The extraction space Elena had created was barely 18 inches wide, a narrow tunnel through twisted metal and concrete, debris that led to the trapped family's location. For most people, it would have been a claustrophobic nightmare, but Elena approached it with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything else that night. I need a medical bag and emergency oxygen. she called to the paramedic stationed at the safety perimeter. "And get me a backboard, the smallest one you have." The requests were delivered with such calm authority that nobody questioned them. Paramedic Lisa Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, found herself gathering the requested equipment with unusual urgency. There was something about Elena's tone that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. Deputy Chief Washington watched through binoculars as Elena prepared to enter the confined space. Her 26 years of emergency response experience had taught her to recognize different types of courage, and what she was witnessing didn't fit any of the standard categories. Elena wasn't displaying the aggressive bravado of a glory-seeking rookie or the calculated risk-taking of a veteran firefighter. Instead, she exhibited a kind of quiet certainty that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. "Has anyone looked at Rodriguez's complete personnel file?" Washington asked Captain Thompson over the radio. "Not just her transfer documents, but her complete service record?" Thompson's response carried a note of confusion. "We received standard transfer paperwork from Station 47. Why? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that nobody learns to work like that without extensive experience in technical rescue," Washington replied. "And according to her file, she's been fighting barn fires for the past 3 years. The observation hung in the air as Elena began her descent into the wreckage. The narrow passage she'd created required her to crawl on her stomach, pushing the medical equipment ahead of her while navigating through a maze of sharp metal edges and unstable debris. One wrong move could trigger a secondary collapse that would trap her alongside the family she was trying to save. The overpass structure continued its ominous creaking, each sound a reminder that time was running out. Structural engineers had established their collapse prediction based on stress analysis and historical data, but buildings and bridges didn't always follow mathematical models. The support beam could fail at any moment, and when it did, the 30-ton concrete section it supported would crush everything beneath it. Elena's voice emerged from the wreckage, muffled but clear. "I've reached the passenger compartment. Beginning medical assessment." What followed was a rapid-fire series of observations that demonstrated medical knowledge far beyond standard firefighter training. Elena's assessment of the family's conditions was thorough, professional, and remarkably accurate given the circumstances. She identified the father's compound fracture, the mother's concussion and possible internal bleeding, the teenage son's dislocated shoulder, and the 8-year-old daughter's shock and dehydration. "The little girl needs immediate 4 fluids." Elena's voice carried through the radio. "She's showing signs of hypovolemic shock. The mother has a significant head injury, possible subdural hematoma. We need to move them fast." Dr. Patricia Mills, the emergency physician who'd arrived with the medical helicopter, exchanged glances with her partner. Elena's diagnostic accuracy was impressive, but more importantly, she was providing information that would be crucial for immediate treatment once the family was extracted. "How does she know all that?" Dr. Mills asked Martinez, who'd positioned himself as close to the wreckage as safety protocols allowed. Martinez shook his head. "I have no idea. 3 months ago, I would have said she was just another rookie learning the ropes. Now I'm starting to think we never really knew her at all." The comment reflected a growing realization among Elena's colleagues. The quiet woman they'd dismissed as inexperienced was demonstrating skills that went far beyond anything in her official record. Her knowledge of structural engineering, her diagnostic capabilities, her calm under pressure, none of it matched the profile of a small-town firefighter with limited experience. Elena's voice emerged from the wreckage again, this time with a note of urgency. "I'm going to start with the little girl. She's the most critical, and should be the easiest to extract through the access point." The strategy was sound from a triage perspective, but it required Elena to position herself in the most dangerous part of the wreckage. The passenger compartment was directly beneath the failing support beam, And if the structure collapsed while she was inside, she would be killed instantly. The extraction process was agonizingly slow. Elena had to carefully maneuver the unconscious child through the narrow passage, supporting her weight while navigating the sharp edges and unstable debris. Each movement required precise calculation. Too much force could trigger a collapse. Too little could result in the child becoming wedged in the passage. "She's clear," Elena announced as the little girl emerged from the wreckage. Paramedics immediately took over, establishing an 4-line and assessing her vital signs, while Elena prepared for the next extraction. The process was repeated with the teenage boy, whose dislocated shoulder made the passage even more challenging. Elena had to carefully position his arm to prevent further injury while guiding him through the narrow space. Her instructions were calm and clear, helping the frightened teenager maintain his composure despite the terrifying circumstances. 2 down, 2 to go, Elena reported, but her voice carried a note of concern. "The mother's condition is deteriorating. She's losing consciousness more frequently." The observation added another layer of urgency to an already desperate situation. Head injuries were notoriously unpredictable, and any delay in treatment could result in permanent brain damage or death. Elena was racing against multiple clocks: the structural collapse, the mother's medical condition, and the physical limitations of working in such a confined space. As Elena prepared for the third extraction, a new voice joined the radio chatter. "Rodriguez, this is Chief Patterson from Station 12. I want you to know that we're all pulling for you out here." The message was followed by similar transmissions from other fire stations across the city. Word of the rescue attempt had spread through the emergency services network, and off-duty personnel were gathering at the scene to offer support. Elena had become the focus of attention from hundreds of first responders who understood the magnitude of what she was attempting. Elena's response was characteristically brief. "Understood. Beginning extraction of the mother." The third extraction proved to be the most challenging. The mother was semi-conscious and unable to assist with her own movement, requiring Elena to essentially carry her through the narrow passage. The process took nearly 10 minutes, during which the overpass structure issued increasingly ominous warnings of imminent collapse. "She's out," Elena announced as the mother was passed to waiting paramedics. "One more to go." But the final extraction, the father with the compound fracture, would be the most difficult. His injury made movement extremely painful, and his size meant that the narrow passage Elena had created would be barely adequate. Worse, his position in the wreckage was the most precarious, requiring Elena to venture deeper into the unstable debris field. Deputy Chief Washington made a decision that would be debated for years afterward. "Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to abort. We've saved 3 lives tonight. Don't throw yours away for one more." The order was reasonable, logical, and completely appropriate given the circumstances. Elena had already achieved far more than anyone had thought possible. Attempting to extract the father would require her to enter the most dangerous part of the wreckage, just as the structure was showing signs of catastrophic failure. Elena's response was immediate and unwavering. "Negative, Chief. I'm not leaving anyone behind." The words carried a weight that transcended the immediate situation. They spoke to something fundamental about Elena's character, something that her colleagues were only beginning to understand. For Elena Rodriguez, the mission wasn't complete until everyone was safe. The concept of acceptable losses simply didn't exist in her worldview. As Elena prepared for the final extraction, the assembled responders watched with a mixture of admiration and horror. They were witnessing something unprecedented in their experience, a level of dedication and skill that challenged everything they thought they knew about emergency response. But they were also about to witness something else, the moment when Elena Rodriguez's carefully constructed facade finally cracked, revealing the truth about who she really was and why she possessed abilities that seemed to defy explanation. The overpass structure issued its final warning, a deep, grinding sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The support beam was failing, and Elena was running out of time. What happened next would change everything, not just for Elena, but for everyone who witnessed it. The quiet hero of Station 19 was about to become a legend, but the price of that transformation would be higher than anyone imagined. As Elena descended into the wreckage for the final time, her colleagues held their breath and wondered if they were about to witness the greatest rescue in their department's history, or its most tragic loss. The trapped father's voice was weak, but determined as Elena reached him. "My name is David Chun," he said, his words punctuated by labored breathing. "I need you to know if something happens to me. Tell my kids I love them." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Mr. Chen," Elena replied, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "We're going to get you out of here." But even as she spoke, Elena could see the severity of his injuries. The compound fracture in his leg was worse than she'd initially assessed, and there were signs of internal bleeding that would require immediate surgical intervention. Moving him through the narrow passage would be extremely dangerous for both of them. Elena began the delicate process of preparing Chun for extraction. She administered pain medication from her medical kit, stabilized his leg with improvised splints, and carefully positioned him for the journey through the wreckage. Each action was performed with the precision of someone who'd done this countless times before. "You're going to feel some pressure," Elena warned, as she began to maneuver Chun through the passage. "Try to stay conscious if you can. I need you to help me by staying calm." The extraction process was painstaking. Elena had to support Chun's weight while navigating the sharp edges and unstable debris, all while the structure above them continued to deteriorate. Several times she had to pause as pieces of concrete broke free from the overpass, each impact sending vibrations through the wreckage. Captain Thompson watched from the command post, his radio in hand, torn between his desire to order Elena to abort and his recognition that she was the only person who could complete the rescue. Her technique was flawless, her decision-making impeccable, but the structural engineers were reporting that the support beam was showing signs of catastrophic failure. "Chief, we're getting readings that suggest the beam could go at any moment," the lead engineer reported. "The stress patterns are off the charts." Washington's jaw tightened. She was facing the kind of decision that haunted commanders for the rest of their careers. Order Elena to abort and accept the loss of one life, or allow her to continue and risk losing both Elena and the man she was trying to save. "Rodriguez, status report," Washington commanded. Elena's voice emerged from the wreckage, strained but determined. "Halfway through the passage. Chun's conscious and stable. We're going to make it." The confidence in her voice was absolute, but it was accompanied by sounds of increasing structural distress. The overpass was failing, and everyone knew it. The question was whether Elena could complete the extraction before the inevitable collapse. As Elena worked, something remarkable happened. The assembled emergency responders, firefighters, paramedics, police officers, and civilians began to move closer to the collapse zone. Not close enough to interfere, but close enough to show their support. They were witnessing something that transcended normal emergency response, and they wanted to be part of it. Lieutenant Martinez found himself praying for the first time in years. He'd served with dozens of firefighters during his career, but he'd never seen anyone work with Elena's combination of skill, knowledge, and determination. Whatever happened next, he knew he was witnessing something that would be remembered long after he retired. "Almost there," Elena announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "Chun's going to make it." But even as she spoke, the overpass structure issued its final warning. The support beam, weakened by the impact and stressed beyond its design limits, began to fail. The failure was gradual at first, a slight sagging, a widening of the cracks, but it quickly accelerated into catastrophic collapse. The 30-ton concrete section that had been precariously balanced above the wreckage began to fall. Elena had seconds to complete the extraction and escape the collapse zone, or she and David Chun would both be killed. What happened next would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. In the space of those final seconds, Elena Rodriguez demonstrated why she was unlike any firefighter her colleagues had ever encountered. Her actions during those crucial moments would finally reveal the truth about her past and explain why she possessed abilities that seemed to defy explanation. The concrete section fell with the inexorable force of gravity, but Elena's response was faster than physics should have allowed. Her movements became fluid, almost supernatural in their precision, as she completed the extraction with seconds to spare. As the dust settled and the debris stopped falling, Elena Rodriguez emerged from the wreckage carrying David Chun in her arms. She was covered in dust and debris, bleeding from multiple cuts, but alive. And so was the man she'd saved. The assembled responders erupted in cheers, but Elena barely seemed to notice. She gently transferred Chun to the waiting paramedics, then turned to survey the collapsed overpass with an expression that was impossible to read. In that moment, watching Elena Rodriguez stand among the ruins of what had been an impossible rescue, her colleagues finally understood that they had never really known her at all. The quiet woman who joined their team 3 months ago was someone else entirely, someone with a past that was about to catch up with her. The rescue was complete, but the real story was just beginning. Elena Rodriguez had revealed herself to be a hero, but heroes, as her colleagues were about to discover, often carried secrets that were as dangerous as they were profound. The aftermath of the Highway 85 rescue unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of emergency protocols and media attention. While paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the Chun family, reporters descended on the scene like vultures, their cameras capturing every moment of what was already being called the miracle on Highway 85. Elena Rodriguez stood apart from the celebration, methodically cleaning debris from her equipment with the same precision she'd brought to the rescue. Her colleagues watched her with newfound respect and undisguised curiosity, but she seemed oblivious to their attention. To an outside observer, she appeared to be simply another firefighter completing post-incident procedures. But Deputy Chief Washington wasn't an outside observer. She'd spent 3 decades in emergency services, and she recognized the signs of someone carrying a burden far heavier than equipment and gear. Elena's posture spoke of exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. It was the weariness of someone who'd been running from something for a long time. Rodriguez. Washington's voice cut through the organized chaos of the scene cleanup. I need to see you at the command post. Elena's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, but she nodded and followed Washington to the mobile command unit that had been established at the scene's perimeter. The trailer was cramped, filled with communication, equipment and incident reports, but it provided privacy for the conversation that Washington knew was overdue. Sit down, Washington commanded, but her tone carried more concern than authority. And don't give me any of that "I'm fine" nonsense. What you did tonight was extraordinary, but it was also impossible. According to your personnel file, you shouldn't have the knowledge or experience to pull off a rescue like that. Elena's expression remained neutral, but Washington caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I followed proper rescue protocols, ma'am. The situation required adaptation, but stop. Washington's interruption was sharp. I've been doing this job since before you were born, and I know the difference between adaptation and expertise. You didn't learn those techniques from a manual or a training exercise. You've done this before, haven't you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. Elena's silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, and Washington saw something flicker across her face, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with the confident rescuer who'd worked miracles in the wreckage. I've had some additional training, Elena finally admitted, her voice carefully modulated. Technical rescue courses, emergency medicine. I pursued them on my own time. Washington leaned back in her chair, studying Elena with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. Technical rescue courses don't teach you to perform complex structural analysis in real time. Emergency medicine classes don't give you the diagnostic skills of a trauma surgeon. And they certainly don't explain how you manage to move a 200-pound man through an 8-inch passage while a building was collapsing around you. The observation struck home. Elena's composure wavered for just a moment, long enough for Washington to see the fear beneath the surface. It wasn't the fear of physical danger. Elena had proven herself fearless in that regard. It was the fear of exposure, of having carefully constructed defenses stripped away by someone who understood the difference between competence and impossibility. "I need to get back to the station," Elena said, standing abruptly. "My equipment needs to be serviced, and I have reports to file." Washington's hand shot out, grasping Elena's wrist with surprising strength. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me who you really are." The words carried the weight of command authority, but they also carried something else, a recognition that Elena Rodriguez was in trouble, and that trouble was about to catch up with her. Washington had seen enough cover-ups and false identities in her career to recognize the signs. Elena's eyes met Washington's, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. The quiet, competent firefighter disappeared, replaced by someone who looked haunted, desperate, and utterly alone. "You don't understand," Elena whispered. "If they find me ... who?" Washington's voice was gentle now, the interrogation tone replaced by genuine concern. "Who's looking for you?" Before Elena could answer, the command post door burst open. Lieutenant Martinez stood in the doorway, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Chief, we've got a problem. The media is asking questions about Rodriguez's background, and they're not getting the answers they expect." Washington's blood chilled. Media attention was the last thing Elena needed if she was running from something. "What kind of questions?" "The usual hero story stuff," Martinez replied. But when they tried to verify her background with Station 47, they got conflicting information. "The current captain says he's never heard of anyone named Elena Rodriguez." Elena's face went pale. The carefully constructed identity that had allowed her to start over was crumbling in real time, exposed by the very heroism that had been meant to keep her hidden. She'd saved 4 lives tonight, but in doing so, she'd signed her own death. "Warrant, get me a secure line to Station 47, Washington commanded. "And make sure nobody talks to the media until I sort this out." Martinez nodded and disappeared, leaving Elena alone with Washington in the cramped command post. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of revelation. "Elena Rodriguez isn't your real name, is it?" Washington asked quietly. Elena's response was barely audible. "No." "And you're not just running from a bad relationship or financial troubles, are you?" "No." Washington sighed, recognizing the signs of someone who'd been pushed to their breaking point. "Look, I don't know what you're running from, but I can see that you're one of the good guys. Whatever happened, whatever you did or didn't do, you saved 4 lives tonight. That has to count for something." Elena's composure finally cracked. Tears she'd been holding back for months began to flow, and her voice shook as she spoke. "You don't understand. I was supposed to be dead. When they find out I'm alive, they'll come for me. And they'll hurt anyone who gets in their way." The confession opened a floodgate of fear and desperation that Elena had been containing since her arrival at Station 19. Washington found herself looking at a woman who'd been living in terror, using her skills to help others while constantly looking over her shoulder for threats that were very real and very dangerous. "Who are they?" Washington asked, but Elena was already shaking her head. "I can't tell you. The less you know, the safer you'll be." Elena wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, the mask of professional competence sliding back into place. "I have to go. Tonight was a mistake. I should never have You should never have saved those people. Washington's voice carried a note of incredulity. You should never have done your job? I should never have exposed myself, Elena replied flatly. I got caught up in the moment, and I forgot that I'm supposed to be invisible. Now people are going to ask questions, and when they do, they're going to find out that Elena Rodriguez is fiction. Washington studied Elena's face, reading the resignation and self-recrimination there. So what's the plan? Disappear in the middle of the night? Leave another false identity behind and start over somewhere else? Elena's silence was enough. That's not living, Washington said firmly. That's just surviving, and barely that. You've got skills that could save hundreds of lives over the course of your career. You're going to throw that away because you're afraid? You don't understand, Elena repeated, her voice carrying a note of desperation. The people looking for me don't just want me dead. They want to make an example of me. And they'll go through anyone who tries to help me. The implication was clear. Elena wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting everyone at Station 19 by maintaining her distance. The quiet professionalism that her colleagues had interpreted as aloofness was actually a desperate attempt to keep them safe from the dangers that followed in her wake. Washington made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to make some calls. See what kind of protection we can arrange. What kind of resources are available for someone in your situation? Elena's eyes widened with alarm. No, you can't involve anyone else. The moment you start making official inquiries, they'll know where I am. Then what do you suggest? Washington's frustration was evident. You can't keep running forever. And after tonight, you can't keep hiding either. Someone's going to figure out who you really are. Elena's response was immediate and chilling. Then I'll have to disappear before they do. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Washington realized she was looking at someone who'd rather vanish into the night than risk bringing danger to innocent people. It was noble and tragic and completely unacceptable. Over my dead body, Washington said firmly. You're not running away from this. We're going to figure it out together. But even as she spoke, Washington knew that Elena Rodriguez, or whoever she really was, had already made her decision. The look in her eyes was that of someone saying goodbye, someone who'd accepted that her brief attempt at a normal life was over. The command post door opened again, and Martinez returned with a grim expression. Chief, we've got bigger problems. The media ran Elena's photo on the evening news, and the FBI just called. They want to speak with her immediately. Elena's face went ashen. The federal interest confirmed her worst fears. She'd been exposed, and the people hunting her now knew exactly where to find her. The safe harbor she'd found at Station 19 was about to become a battlefield. What do they want? Washington asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. They wouldn't say over the phone, Martinez replied. But they're sending agents to the station. They'll be there within the hour. Elena was already moving toward the door, but Washington blocked her path. You're not running. Not this time. You don't understand, Elena said, her voice carrying a note of panic. If the FBI is involved, it means they know who I really am. And if they know, then the others know too. I have maybe an hour before this place becomes a war zone. Washington's mind raced as she processed the implications. Elena wasn't just running from criminals or corrupt officials. She was running from something that had federal law enforcement involvement. The situation was far more complex and dangerous than she'd initially realized. Then we have an hour to figure this out, Washington said firmly. But you're not facing this alone. Elena's response was immediate and desperate. You don't know what you're getting into. These people don't just kill. They destroy everything connected to their targets. Your career, your family, your life. They'll tear it all down just to make a point. The warning carried the weight of personal experience, and Washington realized that Elena had seen the consequences of exposure firsthand. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was afraid for everyone who might be caught in the crossfire. Maybe, Washington conceded. But running hasn't kept you safe so far, has it? You've been looking over your shoulder for months, maybe years. When does it end? Elena's silence was enough. She'd been running for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. The brief respite at Station 19 had been the closest thing to peace she'd known in years, but peace was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tonight ends it, Elena said quietly. One way or another. The words carried a finality that made Washington's blood run cold. She was looking at someone who'd reached the end of their rope, someone who'd decided that the running was over regardless of the consequences. As the two women stared at each other in the cramped command post, both knew that the next hour would determine not just Elena's fate, but the fate of everyone at Station 19. The quiet hero who'd saved 4 lives was about to face the demons she'd been running from. And the battle was going to be fought in the place she'd hoped to call home. The radio crackled with routine traffic, but Washington barely heard it. She was focused on Elena's face, reading the resignation and determination there. Whatever Elena Rodriguez's real story was, it was about to come to light in the most dramatic way possible, and Station 19 would never be the same. The ride back to Station 19 was conducted in tense silence. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Deputy Chief Washington's vehicle, staring out the window at the city lights that had become familiar over the past 3 months. Every intersection they passed could be her last glimpse of the place she'd briefly called home. Behind them, a convoy of emergency vehicles carried the rescued Chen family to Metropolitan General Hospital. The successful rescue had already begun, generating news coverage, but Elena knew that the positive story would soon be overshadowed by darker revelations. Her face was being broadcast across the city as a hero, but that same exposure would bring wolves to her door. "Talk to me," Washington said as they pulled into the station parking lot. "I need to know what we're dealing with before those federal agents arrive." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "My real name is Sarah Martinez. I was a special operations medic with the Army, specialized in urban rescue and tactical medicine. After my discharge, I worked for a private security firm called Blackwater Ridge Solutions." Washington's eyebrows rose. She'd heard of Blackwater Ridge. They were one of the elite private military contractors that handled sensitive operations for government agencies. Their personnel were typically former Special Forces, CIA, or other highly trained operatives. "What kind of operations?" Washington asked, though she suspected the answer would be classified. "Officially, we provided security for diplomatic missions and corporate executives in hostile territories. Unofficially?" Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. "We did the jobs that official agencies couldn't be connected to. Extractions, infiltrations, eliminations. The kind of work that doesn't exist on paper." The revelation explained everything: Elena's impossible skills, her medical knowledge, her calm under pressure. She wasn't just a firefighter with some additional training. She was a former special operations soldier who'd been trained to operate in the most dangerous environments imaginable. So what went wrong? Washington pulled into a parking space and turned to face Elena directly. "Why are you running from your own people?" Elena's composure cracked slightly. "Because I found out that Blackwater Ridge was selling weapons to the same terrorist organizations we were supposed to be fighting. And when I tried to report it through proper channels, I discovered that some of those channels were compromised." The story was beginning to make sense. Elena had stumbled onto a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and corporate power. When she'd tried to expose it, she'd become a target herself. "I had evidence," Elena continued. "Financial records, shipping manifests, communications between company executives and known arms dealers. I thought I was doing the right thing by documenting everything before I made my report. But someone found out what you were doing," Washington guessed. Elena nodded. "My unit was sent on what was supposed to be a routine extraction mission. Syria, but it was a setup. The entire team was killed except for me, and only because I was suspicious enough to hang back and provide overwatch. I watched my friends die in an ambush that was designed to eliminate witnesses. The weight of survivors' guilt was evident in Elena's voice. She'd lost her entire team, people she'd served with for years, because she'd threatened to expose corruption. That reached into the highest levels of power. I went underground that night, Elena continued. I had backup copies of the evidence hidden in various locations, but I knew I couldn't trust anyone in official channels. So I started reaching out to journalists, whistleblower organizations, anyone who might be able to help me expose the truth. Washington was beginning to understand the scope of the conspiracy Elena had uncovered. And they've been hunting you ever since. They've been hunting everyone connected to me, Elena corrected. 3 journalists who were investigating my story died in accidents within 2 months. A federal prosecutor who was interested in the evidence committed suicide in his office. Even my former commanding officer, who I thought I could trust, died in a car bombing 6 months ago. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Elena wasn't just running from corporate assassins, she was running from a network of corruption that had the resources and connections to eliminate threats anywhere in the world. So you created the Elena Rodriguez identity and became a firefighter, Washington said, using your medical and rescue skills to help people while staying off the radar. It was supposed to be temporary, Elena replied. I was trying to establish a new identity long enough to find a way to safely release the evidence. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that this life helping people, being part of a team, making a difference, this was what I'd been missing. Washington could hear the longing in Elena's voice. After years of covert operations and violence, she'd found peace in the simple act of saving lives. But that peace was about to be shattered by the very heroism that had defined her new life. The evidence you collected, Washington said. Do you still have it? Elena's smile was grim. Multiple copies, stored in various locations. But it's useless without corroboration, and everyone who could provide that corroboration is dead. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. Through the station windows, they could see unmarked sedans pulling into the parking lot. The FBI had arrived ahead of schedule, and Elena's time was running out. Whatever happens, Elena said, reaching for the door handle, I want you to know that these past 3 months have been the best of my life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a difference instead of just surviving. Washington grabbed Elena's arm. This isn't over. I don't care what kind of conspiracy you've uncovered. There has to be a way to fight this. There is, Elena replied. But it requires me to stop running and start fighting. And that means putting everyone I care about at risk. The agents were already approaching the station entrance. Elena could see their tactical awareness, the way they moved with practiced efficiency and constant vigilance. These weren't bureaucrats, they were operators, possibly from the same community she'd once belonged to. Sarah Martinez, Washington. Saw it, using Elena's real name for the first time. You saved 4 lives tonight. You've been saving lives for 3 months. Don't let them turn you back into a killer. Elena's response was interrupted by the station door opening. Captain Thompson emerged, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Behind them, Elena could see her colleagues from Station 19 gathered in the common area, their faces reflecting confusion and concern. Special Agent Connor Blake, FBI, the taller agent announced as he approached Washington's vehicle. We need to speak with Elena Rodriguez immediately. Washington and Elena exchanged glances. The moment of truth had arrived, and Elena would have to decide whether to continue running or finally make a stand. Agent Blake, Washington said, stepping out of the vehicle. I'm Deputy Chief Washington. Before you speak with Rodriguez, I need to know what this is about. Blake's expression was professional but impatient. "This is a federal matter involving national security. We need to speak with her alone." Elena emerged from the passenger side, her movements calm and controlled. Despite the turmoil she was feeling, she recognized the type. Blake was former military, probably special forces, now working for agencies that operated in the shadows between law enforcement and intelligence. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," she said, her voice steady. "What do you want?" "To know?" Blake studied her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "We want to know why someone who's been dead for 18 months is suddenly appearing on television as a hero firefighter." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. They knew exactly who she was, which meant that her location had been compromised. The safe harbor she'd found at Station 19 was about to become a battlefield. "I think there's been a mistake," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No mistake," Blake replied. "Sarah Martinez, former Army medic, former employee of Blackwater Ridge Solutions, officially killed in action in Syria 18 months ago. Except here you are, very much alive and apparently working as a firefighter under an assumed identity." Captain Thompson's eyes widened. He was beginning to understand that the quiet woman who'd joined his team was someone entirely different from what she'd appeared to be. "Agent Blake," Washington interjected, "if Rodriguez is in some kind of protective custody or witness protection program, perhaps we should discuss this privately." Blake's laugh was humorless. "Protective custody? Chief Sarah Martinez is wanted for questioning in connection with the deaths of 5 federal agents and the theft of classified materials. She's not a protected witness, she's a fugitive." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Elena felt the weight of every eye upon her, saw the confusion and dawning suspicion in her colleagues' faces. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, transforming her from hero to villain. "That's not true," Elena said, her voice carrying quiet authority. "I never killed any federal agents. I was trying to expose—" "Expose what?" Blake interrupted. "A conspiracy theory about arms dealing? We've investigated those claims, Ms. Martinez. They're fabrications created to justify theft of classified materials and the murder of your own team." Elena's mind raced. They were painting her as a traitor, a murderer, someone who'd killed her own comrades for personal gain. It was a masterful piece of disinformation, designed to discredit her and justify whatever actions they planned to take. "My team was killed in an ambush," Elena said firmly. "An ambush that was set up by people within Blackwater Ridge who were selling weapons to terrorist organizations." "According to your testimony," Blake replied, "but you were the only survivor." Convenient, don't you think? Washington could see Elena's composure beginning to crack. The federal agents were skilled at psychological manipulation, turning Elena's survival into evidence of guilt rather than luck. "Agent Blake," Washington sighed, "I've worked with Rodriguez for 3 months. She's shown nothing but dedication to saving lives. Whatever happened in Syria, she's not a threat to anyone." Blake's expression didn't change. "Chief, with respect, you don't know who you're dealing with." Sarah Martinez was trained in psychological operations, infiltration, and deep cover techniques. Creating a false identity and maintaining it for months would be child's play for someone with her background. The implication was clear. Elena had been manipulating everyone at Station 19, using her skills to deceive them about her true nature. It was a plausible story, and Elena could see doubt beginning to creep into her colleagues' faces. "Furthermore," Blake continued, "we have evidence that she's been in contact with foreign intelligence services, possibly selling classified information to fund her life on the run." "That's a lie," Elena said, her voice sharp with anger. "I've had no contact with anyone from my previous life. I've been trying to stay hidden, not sell secrets." "Then explain this," Blake said, producing a tablet computer. The screen showed financial records indicating large deposits to accounts associated with Elena's false identity. $50,000 deposited over the past 3 months. Where did that money come from? Elena stared at the screen in shock. The financial records were fabricated. She'd been living on the modest salary of a firefighter, but they looked authentic. Someone had gone to great lengths to create evidence of her supposed betrayal. I've never seen those accounts before, Elena said, but she could hear the doubt in her own voice. The evidence was too perfect, too convincing. Someone with significant resources had been preparing for this moment. Blake closed the tablet with a satisfied expression. Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest for treason, murder, and theft of classified materials. You have the right to remain silent. As Blake began reading Elena her rights, Washington felt a surge of protective anger. The federal agents were railroading Elena, using sophisticated disinformation to justify her arrest. But fighting them directly would only make things worse for everyone. At Station 19, Elena's mind was racing as she processed the implications. The conspiracy she'd uncovered had resources that reached into the highest levels of government. They could create false evidence, manipulate federal agencies, and eliminate anyone who threatened their operations. But they'd made one mistake. By arresting her publicly, in front of her colleagues at Station 19, they'd exposed themselves to scrutiny. The heroic firefighter who'd saved 4 lives was being arrested as a terrorist, and that contradiction would raise questions that might be difficult to answer. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Elena met Washington's eyes. The Chun family, she said quietly. Make sure they're safe. And remember what I told you about the evidence. Washington nodded, understanding that Elena was passing her a responsibility that extended far beyond Station 19. The quiet hero who'd saved 4 lives was about to disappear into the federal system. But the truth she'd died trying to expose was still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. The agents led Elena toward their vehicle, but she paused at the station entrance. Her colleagues were gathered there, watching with expressions of confusion and concern. These people had become her family, and she was about to be torn away from them forever. I'm sorry, she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. I never meant for any of this to touch you. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness of federal custody, leaving behind a fire station full of people who were only beginning to understand that they'd been living alongside a ghost. Real story of Elena Rodriguez or Sarah Martinez was just beginning to unfold, and Station 19 would never be the same. Elena Rodriguez, now using her real name, Sarah Martinez, stood before a congressional hearing committee, her testimony being broadcast live to millions of viewers. The evidence she'd collected had sparked the largest government corruption investigation in decades, leading to arrests of senators, Pentagon officials, and corporate executives. Station 19 had become a symbol of integrity in a story filled with betrayal. The firefighters who'd stood by Elena during her darkest hour were now being honored as heroes in their own right. Deputy Chief Washington had been promoted to oversee a new federal task force, investigating private military contractors. The Chun family, whom Elena had saved from the Highway 85 overpass collapse, sat in the front row of the hearing room. Their presence was a reminder that beneath all the political intrigue and conspiracy theories, the story was ultimately about someone who'd risked everything to save innocent lives. Ms. Martinez, the committee chairman said, your actions have exposed corruption that threatened our national security. But you've also shown us that true heroism isn't about recognition or reward. It's about doing what's right, even when the cost is enormous. Elena nodded, her voice steady as she replied. I learned that from my colleagues at Station 19. Taught me that being a hero isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up when people need you most. As the hearing concluded, Elena walked out of the Capitol building into the bright sunlight. Waiting for her on the steps were her colleagues from Station 19, wearing their dress uniforms and carrying a banner that read, "Welcome home, hero." Quiet woman who'd once hidden in the shadows had finally found her place in the light. And Station 19 would never be the same. It would be better, stronger, more united by the knowledge that they'd stood with a true hero when it mattered most. Story of Elena Rodriguez was over. The legend of Sarah Martinez was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.